The apartment was dark except for the thin orange glow leaking from the street lamp outside. The baby monitor hummed faintly, and somewhere in the kitchen, a bottle clinked against the counter. Then came the crash, sharp, violent, the sound of glass exploding against tile. Kate froze, clutching the small bundle in her arms. Ethan stirred, whimpering in his sleep. Paul stood in the doorway, his eyes burning with a strange, feverish light. "There you are," he said, voice low but shaking. "Thought you could hide from me?" Kate's breath caught. "Paul, please, you'll wake him. Don't tell me what to do in my own house," he snapped, stepping closer. The smell of whiskey clung to his jacket. He glanced at the baby, his mouth twisting. "Whose kid is that, huh? You think I don't see it? You tried to pull one over on me, didn't you? Get the place in your name. Use that baby to trap me." Kate's arms tightened around Ethan. "You're not making sense. You need to calm down." "Calm down." He laughed bitterly. "You're a liar, Kate. You and your country family thought you could take what's mine." He took another step forward, eyes flicking from her face to the sleeping infant. Kate's pulse thundered. The air felt heavy, thick with fear. She'd never seen him like this, his face red, jaw clenched, something broken inside his stare. "Paul, listen to me," she whispered, backing away until her shoulders brushed the wall. "I don't want to fight. You're scaring the baby." He reached for her, hand jerking upward as if to grab her arm. That was the moment something in her shifted. The trembling gave way to a cold, steady strength. She raised her chin and met his gaze. "If you ever touch me or my baby," she said quietly, her voice shaking but clear, "you'll regret it." For a second, the room was silent except for Ethan's soft breathing. Paul hesitated, surprised by the calm in her tone. Then she turned, clutching her son close, and walked past him. "Get out then," he shouted after her, voice cracking. "Don't bother coming back." Kate didn't look back. She stepped into the hallway, her bare feet hitting the cold linoleum, the wind from the stairwell biting at her face. Outside, the night air was sharp with the smell of snow and gasoline. She pulled Ethan closer, whispering against his tiny ear, "It's all right, sweetheart. We're leaving now." Behind her, the apartment door slammed. The sound echoed down the hallway like a final verdict. 5 years earlier, the air in Cedar Rapids still held a kind of promise. Kate Dawson was 22, fresh from a farming town where cornfields met the horizon, and dreams felt too big for the landscape. She'd come to the city with a duffel bag, a scholarship to the local community college's theater program, and a stubborn belief that small-town girls could still make something of themselves. During the day, she worked at a cafe near the community theater, pouring coffee for regulars, memorizing scripts between shifts, always smelling faintly of espresso and stage dust. That afternoon in late September, she was wiping down tables when a man stepped inside holding the hand of a little boy. Paul Dawson looked slightly out of place in his security guard uniform. Tall and quiet, his expression tired but kind. The boy, maybe 6 or 7, clutched a crumpled flyer for the children's Play the Adventures of Pinocchio. "They're sold out," Paul told him softly, kneeling down. "We'll catch the next one. Buddy." Kate overheard the disappointment in the child's voice and something in her, the same soft part that made her love theater, wouldn't let it go. She approached the ticket clerk she knew from her evening rehearsals and whispered something. A few minutes later, Paul and the boy slipped into 2 back row seats, grinning as the lights dimmed. After the show, Paul waited by the door, the boy fast asleep against his shoulder. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I owe you." "You don't," Kate smiled, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Everyone deserves a little magic sometimes." That was how it began. The next day, she found a single tulip wrapped in paper waiting on the cafe counter with a note. "For the girl who believes in magic." Paul started stopping by after his shifts, always polite, always asking about her rehearsals. He listened when she talked about her favorite plays, about moving someday to Chicago or New York. He told her she reminded him of something real in a world that had forgotten how to feel. Their first date was a walk along the Cedar River. He brought coffee in thermoses, and they watched the lights shimmer on the water. Kate had dated before, boys who talked more about themselves than about dreams, but Paul seemed different, grounded, gentle, the kind of man who noticed small things. Weeks turned into months. He started bringing her dinner between rehearsals, waiting in the lobby with quiet pride. He told her she was the only real thing in his life. Kate believed him. By winter, she couldn't imagine a future without him. Her friends from the theater joked that she'd fallen headfirst, and she had. To Kate, their love felt like a story finally finding its stage. Simple, pure, and destined to last. 3 months later, the snow had melted into slush along the curbs when Kate and Paul stood side by side inside the Lynn County Courthouse. The ceremony took less than 10 minutes. No music, no bouquet, just 2 signatures, a worn leather jacket on his shoulders, and the faint smell of coffee clinging to her coat. Paul said it didn't make sense to waste money on a wedding when they could start saving for their own place. Kate agreed easily. She thought simplicity meant maturity. That love didn't need witnesses to be real. Afterward, they ate lunch at a diner across the street. Paul ordered a burger. Kate barely touched her salad, too busy tracing the gold band on her finger. He smiled once, that quiet, reserved smile that had first drawn her in, and promised her things would get better from there. He talked about long-term goals, buying a small house, maybe a used car, starting a family when the time was right. It all sounded safe, solid, almost comforting. They rented a 1-bedroom apartment near downtown Cedar Rapids, not far from the community theater. It wasn't much, thin walls, old carpet, a window that didn't quite close, but Kate decorated it with thrift store curtains and framed playbills from her performances. At night, she rehearsed lines softly while Paul dozed off on the couch. It felt domestic in a way she had never known, ordinary but warm. Paul worked long night shifts as a security guard at the Hy-Vee supermarket on First Avenue. He often came home just before sunrise, exhausted, smelling faintly of coffee and disinfectant. Kate would leave for the cafe or her rehearsals just as he crawled into bed, their lives overlapping like 2 pages in a book that didn't quite line up. On her lunch breaks, she wrote in her journal, little fragments of thought and gratitude. He's tired, but good. I think we're building something steady. Maybe that's what love really is. But small cracks began to show. Paul started talking less, his smile shorter, his eyes distant when she spoke about the plays or her dreams of moving to Chicago someday. When she mentioned an audition or staying late to rehearse, he frowned, saying, "You don't have to chase all that. We have a good life right here." There were no arguments, not yet, just a quiet dullness creeping in where laughter used to be. Kate told herself it was normal, that all couples settled into routine. Still, sometimes when she came home after rehearsal and found him already asleep, she felt an ache she couldn't name. The dream she had carried from her hometown still flickered inside her, but the glow felt dimmer now, like a light trying to shine through dust. The test sat on the bathroom counter, a small plastic stick with a single blue line turning into 2. Kate stared at it, hands trembling. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. Then she laughed through tears, pressing a hand against her chest. It felt like the world had tilted in a new direction, terrifying and miraculous all at once. She waited for Paul to come home, rehearsing in her head how to tell him. When he finally walked through the door, smelling of cold air and late-night coffee, she met him in the kitchen. "Paul," she whispered, smiling nervously, "I have something to tell you. We're going to have a baby." He froze. The silence stretched too long. "A baby," he repeated flatly. His eyes didn't light up the way she had imagined. They just stayed fixed on her face, empty and calculating. "Yes," she said softly. "I know it's a surprise, but he cut her off. "You really think we can afford that right now?" The words fell like ice water. Kate blinked, her smile fading. "I thought you'd be happy." "Happy?" He gave a short, bitter laugh. "You're working part-time at a theater that barely pays minimum wage, and I'm pulling double shifts just to keep up with rent. How exactly do you think this works, Kate?" She swallowed hard. "We'll manage. People do it every day. We'll figure it out." He shook his head. "You should think about, options." Her stomach turned. "Paul, no. Don't even say that. This is our child." But the tenderness that had once filled his eyes was gone. Over the next few days, his sarcasm sharpened into cruelty. Every meal became a complaint. Every expense a lecture. "Maybe your folks can send more potatoes from the farm," he'd sneer. "They're good at that, right? Dirt and hard labor." Kate bit her tongue until it bled, hiding her tears when he wasn't looking. She told herself he was just scared. That men didn't always know how to handle responsibility. Late at night, she'd sit on the edge of the bed, hands over her small belly, whispering, "It's okay, little one. He'll come around. He has to." When her parents, Tom and Mary Lane, heard the news, they offered to bring her home to Marion until after the birth. Her father's voice was steady but worried. "You don't have to stay there, honey. You and that baby will always have a place here." But Kate refused. "I need to believe he'll change," she said quietly. The truth was, she couldn't bear the idea of failure, of being another small-town girl who ran back home when life got hard. She wanted her child to grow up, seeing their father as a good man. She didn't know it yet, but the version of Paul she loved was already gone, leaving behind only the shadow of the man she thought she'd married. It was early spring when Tom Lane pulled into Cedar Rapids, his old Ford pickup rumbling to a stop outside the Dawsons' apartment building. The bed of the truck was loaded with boxes, homemade canned goods, quilts from Mary, and an envelope tucked safely in Tom's jacket. He hugged his daughter tightly at the door, noticing the circles under her eyes and the way she smiled a little too hard to hide the exhaustion. "Thought I'd check in on you too," he said, glancing around the cramped apartment. "Not much space for a little one, huh?" Kate's cheeks flushed. "We're managing. Paul's been talking about getting a place of our own soon." Tom nodded, pulling out the thick envelope and placing it on the counter. "This is from the sale of that west pasture. Not much, but it'll give you a start. You use it for something that's yours." When Paul came home from his shift and saw the money, his tired face lit up for the first time in weeks. "This could really help us," he said eagerly, turning to Kate. "My folks might be able to pitch in too. Maybe we can finally stop renting." The next weekend, he drove her across town to the east side of Cedar Rapids, near the railroad tracks and older neighborhoods. They stopped in front of a weathered duplex, its paint peeling, the yard littered with old bricks and a rusted swing set. "It was my grandma's place," Paul explained. "She moved into assisted living last year. My parents said we could have it if we fix it up. It's not much now, but it could be." Kate looked around at the cracked steps, the sagging porch, the stained windows. Inside, the air smelled of smoke and dust. The walls were streaked yellow, the kitchen sink rusted through, and every window whistled with the wind. But she saw more than decay, she saw possibility. "It just needs love," she said softly. Paul smiled, that old spark returning for a moment. "Exactly. We can make it ours." Over the next few weeks, the small duplex became their project. Paul contacted a few contractors from his security job, and Kate spent every spare hour cleaning. She scraped grime from the walls, scrubbed the floors until her hands ached, and picked out paint colors from the clearance rack at Home Depot. Her father's money paid for everything, the new appliances, the plumbing repairs, even the white front door Paul insisted on replacing. When the workers finished, the old place looked almost new. The walls gleamed, the air smelled of fresh paint, and sunlight poured through spotless windows. Kate stood in the living room one evening, her hand resting on her rounded belly, imagining their future here. For the first time in months, she felt certain she'd been right to stay. This, finally, was the beginning of the life they were meant to build together. Weeks passed, and the old duplex slowly shed its skin of dust and decay. The cracked walls were painted over in soft cream, the warped windows replaced with sturdy glass that caught the morning light. Paul oversaw the contractors, though Kate did most of the work, scrubbing grime, hauling debris, sanding the wood trim until her arms trembled. The smell of paint and sawdust filled the air, mixing with the faint scent of the apple-scented cleaner she loved. Each day brought small victories. The first time the new bathroom light flicked on, she clapped her hands in delight. The new front door, a heavy oak with brass locks, clicked firmly shut, sealing away the winter drafts. Kate stitched simple curtains out of leftover fabric from the theater and hung them herself, humming softly as she worked. She imagined rocking Ethan to sleep by those windows, the faint hum of the city outside blending with the warmth inside. Paul praised her at first. "You've got an eye for this," he said one afternoon, leaning against the freshly painted doorway. She smiled, feeling a flicker of pride. But as the weeks went on, his tone changed. He began to talk more about the money he'd saved by managing the renovation, or how lucky they were that his grandmother let him have the place. Kate noticed how often the word "we" disappeared from his sentences, replaced by "I" and "my." Still, she brushed it off. Maybe he was just tired. Maybe he didn't realize how his words stung. She told herself this was what marriage looked like. Compromise, patience, understanding. When the final coat of paint dried and the smell of construction faded, the duplex felt almost new. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, or so she thought. On a quiet Sunday morning, Kate was tidying the nursery when she heard Paul talking in the next room. His voice was low, casual. "Yeah, Mom, it's finally done. My apartment looks great now. Yeah, I'll send you pictures once I get the new furniture in." The words hit her like a slap. My apartment. She froze, the folded blanket in her hands slipping onto the floor. For a long moment, she stood there in silence, staring at the soft yellow walls she'd painted herself. Then she bent down, picked up the blanket, and kept folding. She didn't say anything when he hung up. She only smiled when he walked by, pretending not to have heard. Because peace, she told herself, was more valuable than pride. And maybe if she just stayed quiet, it would start to feel like home again. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and warm cotton. Outside, snow drifted past the window in slow, silent flakes. Kate lay exhausted but glowing, her newborn son resting against her chest. Ethan's tiny fingers curled around hers as if anchoring her to the world. For the first time in months, everything felt right. She whispered his name and felt her heart expand. When Paul entered, she smiled weakly. "He's perfect, isn't he?" she said, tears of relief softening her voice. Paul stared down at the baby for a long moment, expression unreadable. Then he muttered almost under his breath, "He doesn't even look like me." Kate froze. "What?" He shrugged, forcing a laugh. "I'm just saying, maybe he takes after your side. Relax." But the tone in his voice, flat, distant, made her chest tighten. "Back home." That tone hardened into something sharper. Paul started watching her differently, his eyes following her as she moved around the room. When she mentioned Ethan's doctor appointments or the sleepless nights, he grunted without looking up. Then came the comments, quiet at first, then crueler. "Funny how he's got none of my features," he'd say while flipping through TV channels. "You always were friendly with those theater guys." "Paul, stop it," she'd whisper, bouncing Ethan in her arms. "You know that's not true." "Sure, you're a manipulative little actress, Kate, always putting on a show. Guess this was your best role yet. Poor devoted wife, trapped with a baby she tricked her husband into having." She couldn't recognize him anymore. The gentle man from the Cedar River walks was gone. Kate tried to reason with him, reminding him of the home they'd built, the promises they'd made in that courthouse. "We said we'd face everything together," she pleaded one night, voice breaking. Paul laughed, cold and hollow. "Together? You used me for a house. Don't act like this was ever about love." She felt her knees weaken, but she didn't let him see her cry. Instead, she held Ethan tighter, her only proof that something good had come from the wreckage. One evening, as she was folding laundry, Paul leaned in the doorway, arms crossed. "Pack your things," he said calmly, almost casually. "You and that kid are not my problem anymore." Kate looked up at him, her throat dry. For a moment, she searched his face for the man she'd once trusted. But there was nothing left, just contempt and exhaustion. She said nothing. She simply gathered Ethan into her arms, knowing that whatever life waited beyond that door couldn't possibly hurt more than staying here another day. The night she left, the air outside bit through her coat like broken glass. Ethan whimpered softly against her chest as she stepped into the freezing dark, her heartbeat pounding louder than the wind. Inside, Paul's angry muttering still echoed through the walls, fading as she walked down the narrow stairwell for the last time. She didn't take much, just a diaper bag, a few clothes, and her son. Everything else could rot with the memories she was leaving behind. In the car, she dialed her parents' number with shaking hands. Her voice cracked as soon as she heard her father answer. "Dad, I can't stay here anymore." Tom didn't ask questions. "I'll be there in the morning," he said simply. By dawn, the sound of his old Ford truck rattled through the quiet street. When Kate opened the door, he didn't speak right away. He just pulled her into a hug, his flannel shirt smelling of earth and hay. Over his shoulder, she could see the anger burning in his eyes, not loud, but deep and steady like a furnace. He looked around the duplex, taking in the new walls, the fresh paint, the appliances gleaming under the kitchen light. "You did all this?" he asked. Kate nodded, her voice small. "With your money, every bit of it." Tom's jaw tightened. He looked at her, then at Ethan sleeping in her arms. "Then we're taking it back," he said quietly. "If he took everything from you, we'll take back what's ours." Within an hour, he had called 2 men he knew from Marion, contractors who owed him favors. They arrived in a dusty van with tool belts and quiet understanding. Nobody spoke much as they started. The sound of drills and hammers filled the house, sharp and deliberate. The new cabinets came down first, then the stove, then the washer and dryer Tom had bought. They unscrewed light fixtures, pried off the bathroom mirror, even removed the brass doorknob from the front door Paul had boasted about choosing himself. By afternoon, the rooms looked like the inside of a skeleton, bare, raw, stripped of everything that had once made them a home. Kate helped where she could, boxing curtains, unscrewing outlet covers, wrapping dishes she'd found at thrift stores. She moved like someone in a dream, calm but hollow. By evening, the duplex stood naked, exposed wooden frames, faint outlines on the walls where pictures once hung. Tom closed the truck tailgate and turned to her. "That's enough. Let's go." Kate glanced one last time at the house that had held her hopes and heartbreak. The wind rushed through the open doorway, cold and final. She climbed into the passenger seat, Ethan bundled against her chest. As the truck rolled away, she looked down at him and whispered, "This is the last time he'll make me feel small." The snow had started to fall again, soft and steady, covering their tracks before morning. The next evening, Paul returned home expecting drama, the kind where he'd find Kate crying on the couch, begging him to talk, promising to do better. He rehearsed his victory speech on the drive over, smug and sure of himself. But when he unlocked the door, silence met him. Not the usual kind. This was hollow, cavernous, echoing. He stepped inside and froze. The apartment was stripped bare. The couch was gone. The kitchen counters were empty. The refrigerator, stove, washer, every appliance had vanished. Even the curtains were gone, leaving only pale outlines of sunlight on the walls. A cold draft whistled through the living room where the door handle used to be. Paul spun around, disbelief tightening his throat. "Kate!" His voice bounced off the naked walls and came back smaller. He stormed from room to room, finding nothing, no clothes, no baby toys, not even a crib. The nursery he'd mocked was now just 4 bare walls and a single light bulb dangling from the ceiling. He pulled out his phone and dialed her number, pacing. "Come on, pick up," he muttered. The call went straight to voicemail. He tried again and again until the message finally played. "This number is no longer in service." His pulse spiked. He called his mother next. Agnes answered on the second ring, her tone sharp and suspicious. "What now, Paul?" "She's gone," he snapped. "She took everything, even the damn door handle." There was a pause. Then his mother's voice dripped with venom. "I told you that girl was a gold digger. Probably ran off with someone from that theater of hers." Paul wanted to believe that he really did, but as he stood in the middle of the gutted apartment, the truth pressed in like the cold air seeping through the empty window frames. Every piece of furniture, every fixture, every tile had come from her parents' money. The walls themselves still smelled faintly of the paint she had chosen. She hadn't stolen a thing. She had simply taken back what was hers. Over the next few months, the duplex sat half empty, a reminder of his own arrogance. The neighbors whispered about the security guard whose wife vanished overnight. Eventually, Paul sold the place, though the damage from the teardown slashed its value in half. He wasted the money in a year on bars, bad loans, and nights trying to forget. When his mother's health declined, he was the only one left to care for her. The bitterness grew heavier with each passing day, and sometimes, in the quiet between her coughing fits, he'd glance at the peeling paint and think of Kate's hands smoothing it once. Steady, patient, full of hope he'd never deserved. 5 years later, the city lights of Cedar Rapids glowed soft and golden against the winter dusk. The marquee of the community theater read, "A streetcar named Desire starring Kate Dawson." Inside, the hum of the crowd blended with the rustle of programs and the faint creak of velvet seats. Backstage, Kate stood before the mirror in her dressing room, her reflection framed by warm bulbs. The woman staring back wasn't the frightened girl who had once run into the cold night with a newborn in her arms. Her hair was shorter now, streaked with copper highlights. Her posture carried quiet confidence, the kind that came from surviving storms and learning to breathe again afterward. She adjusted the satin strap of her costume and smiled faintly at the faint laugh lines at the corners of her eyes. They weren't marks of age. They were evidence of peace hard-earned. Ethan's small knock on the door broke the moment. "Mom," he called softly. Kate opened the door to find him standing there in his neatly pressed shirt, clutching a small bouquet of daisies. "Grandma helped me pick them," he said, eyes bright with pride. She knelt and kissed his forehead. "You're my good luck charm." "Are you nervous?" he asked. She shook her head gently. "Not anymore." In the auditorium, Tom and Mary Lane sat near the front row, hands folded together, faces glowing with quiet pride. Tom leaned close to Mary. "She did it," he whispered. "She really built it all back." The lights dimmed. The orchestra played its first soft note. Backstage, Kate took her mark. Her heartbeat was steady, not from nerves, but from purpose. The stage manager gave the cue, and as the curtain began to rise, the familiar rush of theater light washed over her face. For a moment, she stood in the glow, the applause swelling from the darkened rows beyond the footlights. She saw shapes she loved, her son sitting tall in his seat, her parents smiling, and she felt no trace of bitterness, no shadow of the man who had once called her small. Only gratitude, only peace, as she delivered her first line. Her voice was calm and sure, filling the room with quiet power. Each word carried more than the role she played. It carried the story of who she had become. When the final curtain fell, the applause rose like a wave. Kate bowed deeply, her gaze catching Ethan's proud little face in the crowd. He waved both hands in the air, his smile wide and fearless. For the first time in years, she felt whole. Her revenge had never been destruction or payback. It was this moment, standing strong, free and unbroken. A life rebuilt not from anger, but from love. And when she stepped into the lights one last time, her eyes shimmered, not with pain, but with peace.